Hello Internet, welcome back to a new video. So Ubisoft recently released their Year 4 Season 4 graph for the defender pick and win rates, and there's quite a bit of chatter around some of the operators, like you can see on the very far right there, out of the 90% plus pick rate with Jaeger. But there's also quite a lot of misconceptions, I feel, with this graph as well. So let's break this down and we'll talk about it now. First of all, I don't want to say the graph is wrong, but it can be quite misleading. Let's look at some of the outliers here, shall we? I first want to highlight this bottom left cluster in the -2% win rate and less than 10% pick rate area, with Warden, Goyo, and Castle. Now, all three of these, according to this graph, are underpicked and too weak. With the exception of maybe Warden, I think Goyo and Castle are two of the strongest defenders in the game when they're used correctly. The issue with them is that when they're used incorrectly, they can often do more harm than good. Especially if it's being used by players that don't know how to use them properly, they can bring more harm to the defense than they can good. So let's sort of talk about these individually, right? So Goyo, let's look at Goyo's kit. He can single-handedly lock down an entire side or area of the map with his three shields, his three, what were they called, the fire shields, and he can delay, I think it's, what, about 10 seconds per shield? That might be wrong, but it's around about 10 seconds per shield. So he can delay about 30 seconds of a push with his shields. He's got two fantastic guns in the Vector and the TCS G12, which is his shotgun. And he can deny plant with his nitro cell from below or wherever. So Goyo's kit is absolutely fantastic, and he's a 2-speed 2 armor, so he's relatively mobile as well. Goyo is one of the strongest operators on defense. He just doesn't get used that often, hence his underpicked rate, which I do agree with. He's very underpicked. Now, moving on to Castle, with his impacts, his 3 castle barricades, he can completely rearrange the map and the bomb site to make it incredibly difficult for teams to counter him. I mean, you can look no further than how very recently Space Station Gaming has been using Castle to roam top floor on Clubhouse. They use Castle to castle off the bar area, and then they play a very vertical style roam up through, from the basement bomb site, up through the bar and up through into the gym and bedroom, which would literally be almost useless and impossible without the Castle there. So when Castle's used properly, he's incredibly powerful. And then, as I said earlier, Warden, I think he's the only one here that you can kind of make a case for not being the best. He's arguably the only one that doesn't really belong with these here. However, I do think we have seen some interesting uses for Warden. I think he just kind of hasn't found where he's best used. A good example of how you can use Warden effectively, I think it was Dark Zero, or maybe it was Team Reciprocity, used Warden very well to hold blue stairs on bank when you're defending their basement. Because obviously, normally teams will try and use flashbangs and that kind of thing to flush out whoever is playing on the blue stairs, and obviously Warden can see through that. There's different places for where Warden's quite useful. I think it's more of a case that there's just other operators that bring more utility than him, but I don't think he's inherently a bad operator, especially now he has a nitro cell. So that's sort of the underpicked 2-weak category of operators. Now we move on to, I think, the most interesting one to me, which is the Kapkan and Frost that are apparently too strong, according to this graph, which again doesn't really make sense to me. Because if you looked at this graph, you'd go, well, trap operators are very, very strong. You know, you've got Legion all the way over there on the sort of like 1% win rate with Frost, and then you've got Kapkan at a 2 to 2.5% win rate. Like, obviously, these trap operators are really, really strong, and you need to be nerfed. But the issue is, with looking at a graph like this for ranked, is that for a lot of the time, these trap operators are only effective because they're being used against bad players. I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean that in a way that people play ranked as not a competitive mode. They don't use their drones effectively, so they don't gather information properly. And so these things like Kapkan traps, Frost traps, all that, go off and get kills when they really shouldn't be. If you did any amount of droning and sort of like decent information gathering on the attack, you would find all of these traps and you would be able to get rid of them before you have to encounter them. So that's why I think those two are up there in that sort of that high win delta. The last two operators I want to talk about, which I think are the most curious of the two on this graph, are Smoke and Echo. Both with less than 0%, well, both with negative win rates, but both with decent presence. They both get between 30 and 40% pick rate, which goes to show that they're not operators that people don't want to use. But the fact that they've got such a low win rate, it leans into the side of the graph that says they're too weak, which is honestly just flat out wrong. Smoke is one of the strongest defending operators in the game. He can stall a push or stall an execute into the bomb site for about 45 seconds with his gas canisters. His shotgun is invaluable for making rotations all over the map on the bomb site. He's got barbed wire or a camera that is it a camera or is it deployable shield? I think it's a shield. So barbed wire or a shield that can be used very useful in a variety of different bomb sites. And then on top of that, he's got one of the best secondary guns in the game in the SMG-11. So to say Smoke is too weak is just wrong. And the same goes for Echo here as well. Saying Echo is too weak is just bonkers to me. His two yokai drones that can completely incapacitate an attacker. On top of that, they can stall the plant, so they can push you off of a plant in the bomb site. Also, his MP5 SD, one of the better guns on the defense, considering it's got an ACOG and fairly high damage and fire rate. And then on top of that as well, he's also then got a Bearing 9, which is one of the better SMGs on the defense, as a secondary weapon. So to say that Echo is a weak operator, it's just flat out wrong, to be honest. And you honestly don't need to look any further for the proof of this than looking at the Season 10 Pro League stats, in which Smoke and Echo appear on the top 5 most popular defenders for the entire season. Now, that doesn't prove that they're incredibly, incredibly strong, valuable, then I don't know what is. So, to link my points back to the graph here, why are all of these great operators being represented so low on the graph? Well, for the most part, these operators, they're not fun. They're not fun operators to play. If you look at an operator like Goyo, Castle, Warden, Pulse, because Pulse is up there as well, they're not fun operators. That's why they're not picked. And you can see why. With someone like Castle and Pulse, the UMP is a boring gun. It doesn't do much. Their abilities often do more harm than good when played by lower skilled, like less intelligent players that don't know how to use them correctly. In the same way with Goyo and Warden, their guns aren't fantastic. They're not the best guns in the game. Their gadgets both require some kind of common sense and brain power to use effectively. So they're just not interesting operators. In the same way that Smoke and Echo kind of fall into this, but obviously they are a bit more picked, as you can see, sort of falling into that 30 to 40% category, is there's a higher skill curve to learning Smoke and Echo. There's a reason that in the competitive community, support players are so hard to come by. It's because these operators that are meant to stall and delay the plant and delay an attacker's execution are so valuable. And that's why an operator like Smoke or Echo is so useful. Because they're so useful, players that don't know how to use them will tank their win rate, which means that they're too weak, according to this graph. Which again, just isn't true. So, that's why these operators are where they are on the graph. But there's one that we haven't really talked about here, and that's Jaeger. This massive outlier that sits at about 90 to 100% pick rate. Why is this? Why is Jaeger super overpowered? What's the reason for Jaeger being so absurdly high picked? Well, the reason is for the exact opposite of what we've just talked about. Jaeger is a fun operator. He's got a fantastic gun, one of the best on defense, if not the best, in his 416C. All of his utility is set and forget, and they're all very simple to use. You know, your ADSs you just put in default places, common places, and his barbed wire you just kind of put wherever. He's got, as I said, 2 good guns, and his pistol's one of the better pistols, and his 416C. He's a 3-speed, 1 armor, so he can sprint around like a madman. And I think one of the biggest reasons why Jaeger's picked so highly is because he's a vanilla operator, right? So everyone has access to him. That means every player, every second or third account, any new player has access to him. This means that naturally his pick rate is going to be a lot higher than a DLC operator, especially on players that have second or third accounts, which is a large portion of the higher ranked community. Is these operators like Jaeger can just kind of do whatever they want, and if you're a good fragger, then Jaeger is the best option for you. And Jaeger is, as I said, just a fun operator to play. You've got a great gun, you can run around, and you can just frag people. That is one of the most fun things to do in Siege. It's the most satisfying thing to do in Siege. And that's why I feel like Jaeger sits so high on the graph, on the pick rate. Now, does this mean that Jaeger is overpowered? Not at all. I personally don't think Jaeger needs a nerf. I think Jaeger is completely fine how he is. So that's basically the video. I feel like I've talked over the kind of points I wanted to talk about. We're up to about 20 minutes now almost. I just wanted to talk about why this graph is a bit misleading. If you don't really know what you're looking at. So just to recap, operators like Goyo and Castle, some of the best defense operators, but when they're used wrong and they're not fun operators to play, they're going to naturally look like they're not very strong and they're not going to get picked a lot. An operator like Kapkan and Frost, very, very effective against lower skilled, lower ranked players because they're just not as effective in clearing different types of utility, whether that's frost mats, Kapkan traps, Ella mines, etc. And then an operator like Jaeger, he's just a fun operator. He always has been the go-to run and gun kind of operator, hasn't he? You know, everyone's, since the dawn of Siege, has always been, oh, you're an Ash Jaeger main. You sprint around and you frag people. That's what you're good at. So, I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you've kind of learned something. I hope I've been able to explain a bit of the reasoning behind this graph. And I hope you can all have a good day, and I'll see you next time.